Welcome to the Still Life podcast, a series of 21 topics, with each episode exploring the practical nature of the spiritual experience. With time-tested insights from psychotherapy, evolutionary biology, and meditation from ex-animator and stillness coach, Jim.
Because I view Jim George as a trainer for the soul. There's no better animation artist, drawer than Jim.
He is a friend, he is a mentor, incredible advisor. There's no one who's more important to me in my life.
The most interesting, most intelligent person I've ever met.
He truly is somebody who wants nothing from you and everything for you.
My name is Henry, and I'm a former client of Jim's, and the work we've done together over the past 8 years has changed my life. We're now on a mission to share these insights with you and to draw some pretty interesting conclusions on how to live a still life. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Still Life podcast. I am your co-host, Henry, and today is episode 7 of 21 in our mini-series. The topic of conversation today is belief. Now, this is something that I just couldn't wait to ask Jim about because it's something that is really just hidden in plain sight, in my opinion. Like, beliefs are driving a lot of our behaviors and a lot of our conversations today, and I don't even know how they're formed. I don't even know what a belief really is, right? So that made me think this is a good one to drill Jim on. And after watching the footage, yeah, the man bloody delivered again, right? First off, we talk about what even a belief is, how they're formed, how they work on both individual and group levels. And then we start to dive into some of the larger belief frameworks that have steered our societies, like the scientific method. Talk about superstitions, and that leans a little bit more into my woo-woo beliefs. As always, Jim does an impeccable job of pulling together a lot of very sort of abstract and sparse information, but putting it in a way that makes it really easy to play with and to just start to understand and recognize within yourself. I know for a fact that I have been noticing beliefs that I didn't even know I was holding about both myself and the world since this conversation. I hope you derive as many states of curiosity and fun as I have just from approaching this conversation with Jim. I'll stop nattering, sit back, and enjoy the show. I'm very excited for our conversation today.
I am too.
I just want to couch it by apologizing a little bit because it's turned into a bit of a monster. So strap in. But today's topic is on belief.
Wow. I believe that's a tricky topic.
I think so too, but I think if anybody's going to get their arms around it, it'll be you. So, as per usual, can we kick off? Can you help us define what is a belief?
Wow. Okay. So, let's begin by saying this is just my view of things. I don't know. I don't know much of anything these days. I know less and less every day. So start with that. But I like to think of belief as acceptance or a willingness to accept something is true, something is real, even that something exists. And often that acceptance comes without what some people might call adequate or sufficient proof or validation. Call it a firmly held opinion. And sometimes it helps, especially when having trouble figuring out how or why someone else's beliefs have come into existence. I like to think of a belief as a useful, even a convenient assumption about what's true in order to get about the business of our daily lives. If we stopped and scientifically validated everything we believe, we wouldn't do anything but that for the rest of our lives. It is that dense a process. So think of it in those terms. I've come to realize that there are two aspects to this belief thing that operate in two very different domains. First, there's a mental aspect to it. That is, we hold an idea in our mind, a concept, a proposition, a representation of something in the world, a symbol. It's the mental part. It's associated with a kinesthetic or a feeling aspect that I just refer to as a sense of knowing. A sense of knowing something. It's tougher to qualify what that is, but I think most people know what that is instinctively. They have a feeling that they know something. And that sense of knowing runs a gamut, a range from at the low end of the spectrum, I think, I guess, maybe it's true, maybe it's not, all the way to the other extreme, which is I am absolutely certain. I have no doubt that this is true. And somewhere along that spectrum, we hit a very important inflection point, a threshold point that I call the convincer. It's a discrete point where we go from I think, I guess, to I know. We've somehow been convinced. But from that point to the upper extreme of absolute certainty, now we're talking about a belief. So you see, there's still a range of quantitative and qualitative conditions on this belief. Firmly held beliefs, beliefs that are so firmly held that if it was shown to us they're not true, we would be disoriented, all the way back down again to, I'm pretty sure this is true. I believe it, but I haven't really examined it. So does that help? Does that confuse things more?
Let me make sure I understand. So a belief is a firmly held opinion, an accepting of something as true or real.
Yes, or that even exists.
Or if it even exists.
Yeah.
A real convenient assumption. Mm-hmm. I liked the way that you phrased that, so I wrote it down on my notebook. And it can be split into two broad categories, one being mental and one being kinesthetic. Mental is more of a representation, an idea.
Yes.
And then the kinesthetic is more of an instinctive feeling within yourself.
They both coexist. They're connected as part of what belief is. You don't have a mental belief without a kinesthetic sense of knowing that it's true. Even people who are very much in their heads, who just don't feel much of anything, there is a point where they're experiencing a kinesthetic sense of knowing, even if it's a feeling of satisfaction at looking at 4 whiteboards full of equations that add up to what we call spelling mother. This makes sense to me. Aha, I'm convinced. And it's a feeling. They may not be familiar with feeling things, but it's there.
So there's an artificial distinction between the mental and the kinesthetic, but both are operating at the same time.
Yes.
And there is those two working together, mm-hmm. and on the other side, a whole range of how much you believe something, how firmly held that belief is.
Yes.
From meh to I'm certain that this is true.
Yes.
And in that range, there's a very critical point, which is when a threshold is met, and that is the
convincer
point.
Yeah.
And at that point, you go from this could be something that's real, this could exist, this could be true in the outside world, to no, this is how things run, this is what's going on.
I believe it.
I believe it.
Yes.
Love that.
You've convinced me.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So why would it be important that our ancestry developed this type of understanding, this type of inquiry, the feeling, the mental aspect as well? Why would it be important for our ancestry to have developed this?
See, this is another great question. I don't know too many people who would ask that question. Why would we have evolved to have beliefs? But that's a very important question, especially if you want to understand what beliefs even are and be able to then further understand your own beliefs, others, and work with them. So I just want to point that out. I love your probing questions. I'd like to suggest that we as a species have evolved over millennia to have relatively few instinctive aversions or fears, as opposed to a lot of other species who are pretty much predestined to operate in their environment based on instinct. This is an incredibly useful behavioral and survival strategy because it makes us Homo sapiens, humans, very adaptable. You can drop a human being into almost any environment, and if you give it the basic needs, it is learning over a period of years, an extended youth period, where it's protected by parents, and it takes a long time to reach maturity. That entire time, we're learning, we're growing, we're adapting to whatever that environment is. A couple of those instinctive aversions or fears are important to our discussion. One of them, a fear of sudden loud noises. All right, you take a little infant, 2 weeks, 3 weeks old, whatever it is. You take one of those stadium air horns, and you right, you're going to have a very unhappy infant.
Jim, what you do in your free time is
Going to be terrified. Yeah. All right, going to go into what's called a startle response, involuntary, instinctive. Okay, but the other one really applies here. A fear of falling. As terrestrial creatures, we're used to having solid ground under us. We need to have solid ground. We need to know what's up, what's down. We need to know our bearings. Where are we? And I'd like to suggest that not knowing, especially not knowing the answer to what I call the deep existential questions, the questions about our existence. Who am I? Why am I here? What am I doing here? How did I get here? Where do I come from? Where am I going? What's going to happen to me? Those are our bearing questions. Those let us know where we are in time and space. Not knowing the answer to those questions is emotionally very much like falling, and we hate it instinctively. And I'd like to suggest that a sense of knowing, as opposed to actually knowing the truth, a sense of knowing is very comforting to us, especially a sense of knowing the answer to those existential questions. Do you remember from our work in values, why does anyone do anything at the deepest, most fundamental level? Do you remember?
to try and feel better than they do right now.
And you hit the operative word, to try. We don't always succeed. to try and feel better than we do right now. If we are emotionally falling, we don't know the answer to these questions that orient us in time and space. We're very uncomfortable. We're frightened. A sense of knowing is very comforting. A sense of knowing lets us feel better than we do right now, not knowing the answer to those questions and all the other questions that frankly derive from those existential questions. I'd like to suggest a sense of knowing, belief, can be more important than actually knowing the truth in our day-to-day lives. We've evolved to be able to hold these tentative beliefs as if they're true so we can function. We validate them as best we can, but we've got some other pretty important things to do, like surviving. Does that help see where that might come from?
Absolutely. And it feels as if there's another piece to this where we as a tribal species are very dependent on the group for our survival.
Exactly.
And if we can identify with different aspects and believe in different things together, there's also this sense of comfort knowing that others are in the same boat. And there's this sort of herding instinct that feels safe and feels comfortable too.
Can I suggest that you've hit on something crucial? Let's quickly review. We drop out of the trees back on the Serengeti Plain because those trees are starting to recede and we can't survive anymore. We're on the ground. We're not suited to be on the ground. And as individuals, we're not very big. We're not very strong. We're not very fast. We are literally snacks to larger, faster, more powerful predators. It's very important to remember that because we're pretty cocky now, but back then we were on our way to extinction. And it's tough to remember because of all our technology and what's happened in the world. But at that time, an adult male lion can take and kill an adult male Homo sapiens like that in no time. An adult male lion can take 2 or 3 adult male Homo sapiens. We're on our way out. The thing that's interesting, an adult male lion cannot take 150 adult male Homo sapiens with a single coherent idea to kill it. That decision to form larger and larger groups took us from the lower third of the food chain all the way up to the apex of the food chain in oddly short order. That means we're dependent on the group. One of the best binders of a group, especially a larger group, is common beliefs. It's one of the best ways to bind a large group. Now, it's one thing to be able to get groups of 10 or 20 together, a number of groups, subsets of this genus, Homo sapiens, and Neanderthals, right? Some of these other subgroups could form these groups of 10, 20. Homo sapiens started to develop this ability to form larger and larger and larger groups, completely unwieldy groups, except they have common beliefs, common narratives. It allows people to be a member of that group without even knowing one another personally. That's an evolutionary skyrocket. And it's hard to remember that A guy named Yuval Noah Harari went into this at length in his book *Sapiens*. It is a great read by a brilliant man. But to know that these beliefs are so much more important when you realize they're part of the glue that's holding us together, allowing us to survive.
And not just survive, it feels like forge empires.
Oh, thrive, yes.
Because the paradigm at which the beliefs sort of arise, if it can spread over not just 10, 20, but hundreds of thousands, that's how you can erect a pyramid, believing that it will take this semi-god to the afterlife.
That's exactly right. That there is, in fact, an afterlife for this semi-god to go to. That's a lot of stretched mental silly putty. But there it is. The thing is standing there as a testament to that very thing.
So I think what's really interesting about belief is that so much of it is invisible to us immediately.
Yes.
Because it takes really highlighting it and peeling it apart.
Yeah.
I think that's why *Sapiens* was a bestseller for so long, because it pointed out the obvious in the ordinary.
Yeah.
And it made it sort of strange and unfamiliar, and you really recognize it in a different way, recognize it in a different way. And so I think that these, as Yuval would say, useful fictions are incredibly important for us to bind together.
Yeah.
Do you think there's any use in us becoming consciously aware of these beliefs? For example, a belief that us in the West really abide by is that money is real and that you can own property.
Yes.
Those are two things that aren't necessarily real as such. So it seems that we can believe in these larger and larger fictions, and there's some use to that. Is it even important for us to recognize that these beliefs are working in the first place?
I believe it is. But I also believe that there is a very important distinction between group beliefs and individual beliefs, and that a life well lived is a good balance between the two. You've raised this notion of money, for instance, as a group belief. We believe in money. So let's take a look at that. What is money?
It's a medium of exchange.
Yes. Can I suggest that good money is a convenient medium of exchange, because 100-pound granite blocks are not convenient to pull out of your wallet. So we develop more and more convenient medium of exchange, but that medium of exchange has to stand for something. It's a symbol. So many of these things represents so much of this stuff that's not so convenient. Rooms full of precious metals, safes full of diamonds, right? So we develop these things. They start with rocks, shells, shiny objects, whatever it is. So many of these represent so much worth. So we get what's called a standard. We try to standardize that. For the longest time, our currency was on what's called the gold standard. This piece of paper and this minted coin has no intrinsic value. It represents so much gold. And for the longest time, even empires had to abide by that. They had to have that gold in stock, or their currency, their medium of exchange, their word, didn't amount to anything. Then very brilliant economic minds decided, well, yeah, let's get off the gold standard, let's make it silver. we did the same thing. Then it's like, well, we don't need to be on the gold standard, dollars. The fiction got deeper. So now we've got these Federal Reserve notes that stand for what? This note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. What does it represent? Well, nothing. But everyone still agrees that it has a certain amount of worth. My time is worth so many of these worthless pieces of paper. Your good or service is worth so many of these pieces of paper. Now we've gotten to the point where the pieces of paper are too damn inconvenient. The little nuggets of metal are too inconvenient. So we've got digital zeros and ones. What I'm suggesting is, if you don't understand this, you will continue glibly following this vector. And it might become worthwhile to pay attention. Because I have so many of these digital zeros and ones in my digital bank. And if somebody were to hit the wrong key, well, what happened? I don't have any more of these digital zeros and ones. What just happened? Well, if enough people think like that, the faith in this whole system would collapse. It's happened before, it'll happen again. So knowing that this is in fact a fiction, to me, is useful in making decisions. Now, if you don't want to be bothered, that's okay. But if you do, it's nice to understand that.
Yeah, and I also think that if you have the ability to become aware that this is what's actually going on, then you can also become aware of how much of your own self-worth you might be attributing to the zeros in your bank accounts.
Yes.
And when you realize that this is a useful fiction, it can help to untangle whatever sort of egoic part of self had filled that space.
Brilliant.
Because it's fake, it's fiction.
Yes.
And so if that were to disappear and then you're crushed because you've gone from something to nothing,
yes,
and it wasn't even real in the first place,
yes,
having the ability to take a step back and be like, actually, this is important. Don't get me wrong. I'm not going to say that money is not important.
Good for you.
Otherwise, I'm going to be on the side of the street.
That's right.
And probably asking for money.
Yeah, can I have something that's not important?
Yeah,
well, if it's not important, you don't need it.
But I think that you did a very good job in answering this question, because becoming consciously aware in what you're believing in, especially these useful group fictions,
yes,
can help you to evaluate what it is that you should believe in, what it is that would be strategically important for you to believe in based on states of mind in the future.
Yes, and you've hit on so many important points. The key here is not, is it important or is it not important? How important is it relative to something else? So money is very important. If it wasn't, we wouldn't have it. Is money everything? If you lose your money, do you cease to exist? Because for a number of people that I know, never mind in the world, they believe, in other words, their identity is so deeply attached to this piece of fiction, if they lose their money, they cease to exist. They are operating at a survival mode in fight, flight, trying to protect zeros and ones. And I'm not suggesting that you should just throw your money away at all. It's very important. But it can save your life if you take a deeper look and understand, yeah, I may have lost all my money, but who I am can make more money. That's a belief. May or may not even be true. But you see where beliefs start coming into play at all levels of existence, how important they are and why they're there.
I love this. So I think another revolution in humanity's belief system was the scientific method. And it really came with the discovery of our own ignorance, looking through the telescope, looking through the microscope. What is available to us might not be all there is. Right? So there's this added variable to collecting beliefs, which is now empirical evidence. Can we test this and repeat it outside of ourselves if it challenges our intuitions? And then we can say, actually, even though this might not feel kinesthetically real, the data here supports that it is. And if I put my chips on this, it's going to come through more because it's maybe in a tighter fit in accordance to reality.
What does come through more mean?
That in future events, the behavior from the universe will be more likely to occur in this way than in a way that might come more intuitively to us in the first place.
You can predict the future, which is why we have our neurology. It's constantly trying to predict the future. Where am I going? What's going to happen? All of these amazing tools that human minds have come up with are a desperate attempt to stop falling.
So I think the scientific method did us a great service in helping to predict the future and to give us that sense of comfort. But do you believe that there are any limitations with this method? And do you think that there are any areas where it might fall short in really helping to shape our beliefs?
Well, this gets tricky. If it gets too esoteric and off into the weeds, stop me. Because the short, simple answer is, how could that not be a great thing, the scientific method? I'd like to suggest that at an extreme, the scientific method and science in general is still an outgrowth of human beings. And human limitations can often be blind spots. And very frequently, the blind spots, by definition, are things we don't know are there. Unknown unknowns, as they say. And either not knowing or ignoring the limits of our ability to know anything based on the physical limits of our nervous system, I think is a dangerous thing to do, the inability to see that. I think real scientists are absolutely aware of that. Real scientists are beautifully humble. True scientists are rarely arrogant. And just to put a fine point on that, I'd like to suggest that arrogance is just a form of fear. You know you're not on thick ice. So you start puffing yourself up and grabbing what you do have and saying everything's fine. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. I'd like to suggest, though, that science is a human endeavor. There are good scientists, there are not so good scientists. But this method is very, very useful. And if it's executed rigorously, it helps us predict the future better and better and better. But the more we try to know, let me put it this way. Some people get this sense of knowing fairly easily. They get a sense of knowing. They get that comfort fairly easily. They're 7 years old. They hear thunder. They ask Uncle Phil, what's thunder? And Uncle Phil says, well, that's easy, kid. It's two clouds bumping into one another. And kid says, cool. Uncle Phil seems smart. And that's a belief now.
Low convincer point?
Low convincer. That belief may go unchallenged until that kid hits college and takes a science survey course and sounds like an idiot when the teacher asks, what's thunder? Because the teacher will bring in some proof, some validation that says that's just not even remotely true. Other people don't get that sense of knowing easily. They can't get that sense of knowing unless they know that what they know is in fact true. Their convincer's way up on that continuum. Those are the people that gravitate toward what I call the knowable. What's knowable? First, what's knowable directly by our five senses. What do we see, hear, feel, taste, touch? What can we measure? What can we weigh? The birth of physics, what is now referred to as Newtonian physics, because physics very quickly started answering these questions beautifully, precisely, at the level of human environment. But when we started going way up here, the astrophysical level, and way down here, the subatomic level, where we can no longer directly observe things, far more questions were raised for every answer we got. Till finally, what appeared to be solid matter was revealed to be this squirrely, weird, very similar to falling reality of fields and particles and subatomic particles and quarks and bosons that have spin and charge, and it's just bizarre that this may be an illusion of our senses. So that sense of knowing had to be really carefully vetted, proven through this scientific method, indirectly, by paying attention to what happens when things we can't see, hear, feel, taste, or touch interact. And this is where science has just done a brilliant job, because they create these hypotheses, a hypothesis, hypo, below the level of a theory, which is a very, very tentative assumption that something is true to be used as the basis for further examination. We're temporarily assuming something's true, but kind of not really, because we're still testing it. And that hypothesis, as it's rigorously tested, becomes a theory. That theory then becomes scientific orthodoxy, what science believes. But remember, that's only as good as your ability to either validate or invalidate whatever that premise is. So the scientific method is the best we've got. Let's put it that way.
And I think that over time, as a species, we started to observe the results of being able to reality test externally.
Exactly right.
We
Yes.
got an incredible amount of technology from it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, look at what we're
Yes.
able to do because of it.
Yes.
And I think that where it can go wrong is, you mentioned what's behind the curtain.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the time, as like we just are looking for shortcuts.
Yes.
We just want somebody to tell us the answer. Should I do this or should I do this? And if somebody sort of puts the qualifier that this has been rigorously tested, it's like, oh, great, I'm just going to blindly abide by this.
Yeah.
However, when looking behind the curtains, if you're, for example, getting told that science has just proven that Kit Kats are the best thing that you can eat for your nutrition ever, and you take a peek behind the curtain and it's sponsored by Nestle, it's like, well, maybe that framework is actually being manipulated. And I think that this goes back to your point where it's like looking for the true scientists who are not operating from a place of fear and control, but of just utter humility with this sort of simulation that we're all sort of being a part of. That's sort of, I think, where the scientific method is at its best. But I think that there is a danger with it being warped to other people's incentives and disguised as something that it's not. That's something that I've always found quite frustrating in my own endeavors, because I'm like, well, how much science is there really to back this? And who's conducting it and who's funding it?
And let's get to what's motivating someone, because this is underlying all of this. One of the key characteristics of a true scientist is curiosity in as unbiased a way as humanly possible. Those are huge qualifiers. Why might you, as a confirmed Halloween candy junkie, want to believe that Kit Kats are in fact a great source of nutrition?
Because it fits my habits conveniently and
That's
it feeds
right.
my addictions.
And it feels better than eating something that you know is going to put you into a diabetic coma.
And it also helps me win arguments at the Thanksgiving dinner table when somebody has a sort of counter belief.
That's right. So you would want to believe that. You would have a bias to believe that. So that belief may not have a chance at getting true rigor in its validation, or more accurately, its invalidation. You have to be willing to validate or invalidate. And even science gets locked into what we'll call orthodoxy. What science believes at any given time, it becomes unbelievably resistant to change. Right now, as a young up-and-coming PhD, you would have an awful time getting funding to even study something that science doesn't think is worth studying. I say science as if it's a single-headed creature. It's not. But statistically speaking, most of what, quote, science has believed in the past has been proved to be all or at least partially inaccurate.
Or at least very difficult to replicate.
Yeah.
And I think that there was a mini epiphany that I had where there's sort of this ironic aspect where if you're purely curious as a scientist, it's not very intuitive to be like that, because if you're trying to lead a group, you have to give the group this air of certainty, this air of comfort, where it's like, I know what needs to happen and this is how it's going to work. Whereas the scientist, having to be far more responsive to the universe, then has this position where they have to hold a healthy amount of doubt. And that's hard to attract followers.
That's right.
And so there's this dichotomy, there's this aspect of not necessarily being balanced, and that's at a very, very unconscious level. And so a lot of scientists may slip in different areas because it's so hard to maintain this doubt and so hard to suspend it. And then to really be, you have to really hold a very firm belief that discovery of truth is the most important value to you.
That's right. And this is where things get interesting, because talking to a true scientist can be some of the most uninteresting conversation because they're qualifying everything so carefully. I really admire that, by the way. It's just so much easier to say some radical conclusion based on evidence that's suggesting that further research might be warranted, which is what a lot of these white papers wind up saying. And then the New York Times publishes Kit Kats, clinically proven to increase your body mass. It's like, no, that's not what they're saying. But that doesn't sell papers. That is science. And it takes a real special person to be a true scientist. I think we can adopt more and more scientific view of things without having to be that rigorous. But I assure you, you cannot empirically test everything you believe. You can't. So at some point, you are assuming the validity of something based on a convincer.
That's a brilliant segue to my next question, because when evaluating your own beliefs, if you don't have the special ingredient of empirical evidence to help firm a belief, is that a superstition? Is that just faith?
So you're saying you believe something yourself, it's a belief. Is it internally validated to you?
By internally validated, do you mean that there's the kinesthetic feeling that this is true?
No. Do you have validation of any kind yourself? I don't even mean internally. Do you have some validation for that belief? Or are you just saying, I don't know, that pen can stop a tsunami if I hold it up?
So I would say yes, there's some internal validation and potentially even external validation. But maybe not empirical or rigorous evidence. And let's use an example. That might help clarify these things.
Sure.
I believe that my life is guided by something larger than myself. Now that's something that might be difficult to gather empirical evidence to support. However, if I hold that belief and look for confirmation through events, that might solidify a belief. But if I was to publicly exclaim that, there might be a few people that say, well, that's faith, or even further, that's just superstition. What would you say to that?
Number one, I would say, if you'd like, I'd love to engage in some validation, beginning with, when you say me or myself, what do you mean? And let me just cut to the chase. If we do our work rigorously, in fairly short order, it's going to be self-evident something bigger than yourself, your isolated body, whatever it is you think that is in fact working here.
Now, and this goes absolutely to why the scientific method is so beautiful at confirming something that isn't necessarily evident to our intuitions.
That's right.
Because if we are to just use a couple of thought experiments, of course we're a part of something bigger. It would make no sense whatsoever for you to just spontaneously appear from a planet on a planet and have no connection to it whatsoever. And it's like that analogy that you use. I remember this so well. About 5 years ago, you're like, imagine there's this bed sheet and you twist the bed sheet and you put a rubber band around that bed sheet. That elastic band is ego. That's ego, right? And then you take the elastic band off and you let it, and she's like, that's what happens when you get still.
You go back to being what you actually are. This is an illusion. So real quick, let's take a moment and picture this bed sheet analogy that Henry was talking about. An analogy to wholeness, to who and what we may truly be underneath all the noise and distraction. All right? So, first, let the child in you just imagine that you're standing in front of a bed sheet. All right? And then just reach over and take that bed sheet right in the middle and begin to pull that bed sheet up with your hand. All right? Then just reach around with your other hand and gather that bed sheet, a little part of that bed sheet, with that other hand. All right? You with me so far? Okay. Then just go ahead and draw a face onto that gathered piece of the sheet, and imagine that that's your face. Imagine that's you. And this is the rest of the universe. Okay? Then, well, let's just tie a little red ribbon around that separation point between who you now think you are and the rest of the universe, the rest of that bed sheet. And we'll call this tied ribbon your ego. All right? Then, just imagine, even for a moment, what it would be like to untie that ribbon. You untie that ribbon, and suddenly, who you thought you were, who you may think you are now, begins to expand back into who you really are. This expansion may be disorienting at first, but then you realize, wow, you're just returning to who and what you've always been, all along. And this can happen in our lives. This can happen when we find ourselves in what I call deep nature. This process of letting go of that ribbon can happen when we're engaged in an activity, really focused, especially something that we love to do. It can even happen when we're engaged in a profound conversation. But remember, the only thing that's happening is we're forgetting to forget who we really are. Does that make sense? Yeah. This thing suddenly, this separate thing, appears for all intents and purposes to be a separate thing. It appears. But by doing some interesting internal and external work, you realize that rubber band is just an illusion, in that rubber band is creating the greater illusion that this blob of bedsheet is not this. But in exactly the same way that we talk about a wave in the ocean as a thing, as opposed to the rest of the water in the ocean, it is a thing in the sense that we create separation and say this wave is different from that wave. But the stuff it's made of is all the same. That's just science talking now. It's not woo-woo spirituality. I mean, it's a cool spiritual metaphor, but it's true.
Well, let's dig into this a little more, because I feel as if we're right on the cusp of, at least for me, something insightful.
Sure.
Because that was helpful for me to change my beliefs, because automatically I believed that as Henry Mitchell,
Yes.
I am this narrative and I am separate and I'm going to try and be as special as possible with all of my encounters and endeavors in life.
All of that is true, because as Henry Mitchell, da-da, 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 da-da. The question is, are you Henry Mitchell?
Well, that's yes, no. Because when using just this thought experiment, it's like, well, I'm not the two words.
Right.
I'm not my accomplishments.
Right.
I'm not anything to do with that.
Yes.
However, the piece of meatloaf between my ears is propping up these convenient illusions
Yes.
that are helping me to navigate chaos well.
Yes, as long as you remember that.
Well, it's helpful to have that information to help shift
Yes.
my belief to be more in alignment with reality.
Yes.
Because believing that my life is guided by something larger, it's like that something larger is the big bedsheet.
Yes.
Right? And I really do believe in wholeness. And I
Yeah.
do that strategically even if it impinges on superstition and faith.
Yes.
Because it helps me to change my states of mind in difficult situations.
When you need them. Does it help you to know that the file folder on your desktop, on your laptop computer, isn't a file folder at all? That's a silly representation in pixels on a screen of a bunch of zeros and ones that are unfathomable to you, code that would just tie you up in knots.
Yeah, it's much simpler to show the monkey the desktop
That's
with
right.
a file and a trash
it's
can.
a brilliant, useful shortcut.
Yes.
Unless and until you panic and try to climb into that screen to get the piece of paper that you just lost, then you're in trouble. I'm saying the same thing applies here. At what level do you want to operate? What scope of context? Your beliefs aren't hard and fast. They're relative to scope of context. That's all. And it can save you from going utterly neurotic if you'll remember that. As long as we're operating at this domain, the domain of relative to the size of humans and human environment, this is what we believe, and it works. The minute you go down into the subatomic world, that falls apart. It is not useful to operate at the domain of Newtonian physics with the belief system of none of this is real, because it is relatively real at that level. The subatomic physics and astrophysics don't jibe. It's one of the big, dirty secrets of physics. It's a drag. There are inconsistencies between them. Everything works at each level. If you put them together, it doesn't spell mother, not yet. So understand what you're saying. I want to make this as specific and tangible as I can. Your beliefs are only as good as you realize the domain or the scope that those domains are working in. As long as we're talking about Henry Mitchell, this body that has a history, and we agree that's what we're talking about, we can have a coherent conversation. The fact of the matter is, a freshman physics student knows there's really no hard boundary between the edge of your head and the atmosphere. It's a bunch of electrons spinning around. Valence is shifting all the time, going off, coming back. It's the illusion at this level that we're building our beliefs on because we want to operate at this level. All you have to do is get quiet enough, that level drops or expands, depending on what you're doing with your state. And you can do some very important work, but it's not at the level of Henry Mitchell's autobiography. That's all.
So to follow up with that, if I have a set of beliefs within me, can that affect the way that my body reacts to me?
Absolutely.
And I think to further this and sort of tether it back to the scientific method for a second, is that a lot of our drugs are compared to the placebo.
Yes.
And the placebo is just really based on belief. You can give somebody, sugar pills,
Yes.
and groups can heal themselves and groups can not, based on...
By giving them a sugar pill and saying, this is a sugar pill, let's let everybody know exactly what we mean by placebo.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, sorry. I can be a lot clearer here. So controlling against basically having an authority figure like a doctor say, yes, we're going to put you into this study and this could be the intervention. And usually they say like you could get given a drug or you could get given placebo. I don't know. It's double blind.
Yep.
Nobody knows. Shrug your shoulders.
Yes.
And from that time, it's incredibly effective if people just hold the belief that they're taking a drug.
Yes.
You can give... did you ever see that Looney Tunes movie where Bugs Bunny drinks Michael Jordan's water?
No.
And it was like Michael's special sauce and he gives it to everybody on the team and they read the
that's all
monsters?
right.
You didn't see that? No, okay. Well, anyway, that's a classic example of the placebo effect.
Yeah.
Where you can sort of, I wouldn't say trick yourself, because I don't think I want anybody to say to them like, oh, I'm just going to take a bunch of these sugar pills and pretend it's...
Play like Michael Jordan.
Yeah, think that that's the case. Anyway, so is the placebo effect based on belief, and is that belief system so unconscious to us that it's out of reach, do you think? Or is that something that we could actually play around with?
Absolutely, we can. Absolutely, it's built on belief. And I'd like to suggest beliefs are powerful. They're not all powerful. Problem with a culture like ours is it says, well, if this, then everything. No. A firmly held belief can change your perception of the world. If you'll think of beliefs as filters on what it is you perceive and how you perceive it, a layer of filter. If you believe certain things, you are allowing certain information in, and you are excluding other information based on those beliefs. That radically affects your perception of the world. May I suggest your perception of the world is your world. It's the world. To the point where there may not even be an objective world out there with nothing and no one to perceive it. That gets into some deep philosophy. I don't even want to raise the issue. If you believe a certain thing, it can change your neurology. It can change your blood chemistry. That's a very powerful thing. Now, the non-scientific thing to do with that is, well, all I have to do then is believe that someone's going to knock at the door and hand me the keys to a Ferrari. I'm not saying that. And I hope to God no one even remotely hears me saying that, because that's crazy talk. What I am suggesting, though, is belief is powerful, especially internally, because it affects how you perceive the world. Perception is projection. How you perceive the world is your world. This system called a reticular activating system that excludes 99.99999% of everything and allows a dribble of information in. What is it that decides what's going to get in and what doesn't? You, because you're programming that reticular activating system all the time, consciously and subconsciously. Buy a brand new red car and watch how many red cars you start noticing. Buy a gizmo, whatever it is, something, and notice how you start noticing those things. Couples have kids, all they see are kids. There are places you and I could go in South Beach, Florida, during spring break, and you and I would be invisible. College students would walk into us while they're perceiving makeable, people they can hook up with, places to hook up, or places to eat. That's what they're perceiving. They just walk flat into me like I'm not there. That reticular activating system is working in all of us. Very important to know that belief and what I call suggestion that can impact belief, very powerful and useful.
And it seems as if the reticular activating system really evolved with us, because if I'm walking around the savannah and something pops out of
Yes.
my field of vision
Yes.
and it's blue and it tastes good, then it would be really advantageous to keep walking around. And whenever I see something popping out that's blue, it's like boom,
Yes.
boom, boom. I'm finding it and I'm eating a bunch of blueberries. This is
Yes.
great. And so
But what if every blade of grass triggered your RAS, your reticular activating system? Every blade of grass.
absolutely overwhelmed and wouldn't be able to function.
Right. So it takes an average and says that's not important until those blades of grass part in a vector. And all of a sudden, whoa, is that a predator? Because we've programmed that thing. Now all of a sudden, those same blades of grass are very important. See how subtle and sophisticated this thing is.
Yeah, and it's so sophisticated that, to the point that you are making, you can now apply this to abstractions as well.
Yes,
And,
and we often do.
we often do.
Yes.
Okay.
That's why I love you. This is brilliant. Abstractions in our mind.
So we can change the way that we perceive the world,
Yes.
and thus we can change the way that our body reacts to it.
Yes.
And, well, do you think that there's ever an instance where we can change the way that the world interacts with us based on our beliefs?
Yes, but I have to be very careful in how I frame this, because there's very little that you can do to control the world. First of all, I'm sorry there's no Santa Claus. But as you change how you interact with the world is, by definition, going to interact with you in a different way. So at least indirectly, yes, to your question. If I begin to behave in such a way that I am genuinely expecting a constant parade of helpful things to happen to me, I may not consciously know how they're going to help me, but if I am now looking for how these helpful things are going to help me, I'm going to have a completely different day today than if I am looking at everything that's coming as yet another way that these SOBs are trying to get me down. That's a decision that I've made that changes my day from heaven to hell and then back again. Now, some may say that's delusional, but I'd like to suggest, if you'd like, we don't have time here because it'll put people to sleep, and that's unfortunate. I wish it didn't. We could go through and quite rigorously prove how and why that's true. Unfortunately, it wouldn't be a quick hack. It wouldn't be a quick shortcut, because this is far too complex to be a quick hack or a quick shortcut. I'm telling you, there's validity to it.
Well, this is a reason that I love you so much, because you always answer the question. Well, not always. There's different answers that you have, but there's a trend when I ask you, how are you? You say, I'm the luckiest man alive.
Why do you think I say that?
Well, I think I've started doing it myself.
Good for you. What's happened?
Well, it's created this handshake where it's like, firstly, it's an affirmation.
Yes.
So I'm priming my reticular activating system
Yes.
to see lucky things throughout the day.
Yes.
But then it also just breaks people's patterns in terms of they don't hear that usually as a response because
Right.
it's usually intended, as you say, as an acknowledgement.
Right.
How are you?
Hi, how
Good.
are you?
Yeah, it's not like you
Yeah.
actually care about the answer.
Yeah.
But then when people ask me, why is that?
Yes.
I always have, I never try and answer that question the same way, because by shaking up the snow globe and trying to find some other reasons why I consider myself the luckiest man on earth, I'm bending this narrative and reinforcing a belief in myself. And at that point, I change my state of mind.
Yes.
And I remember the truth that,
Yes.
oh my God, it is a bloody miracle to be operating this biomechanical meat suit.
Yes.
And to be interacting and having this experience in the first place.
Yes.
And that right there is just, it's a gorgeous way of living.
Why have you now sorted for all these lucky things, and therefore you're aware now of all these lucky things? What changed? The lucky things have been happening all along. You were just ignorant of them. By making that statement, you had to go validate it to somebody. And you did.
This is why I wanted to ask that question though, because the funny thing is that I feel like even though the data had always been coming in,
Yes.
it's been coming in with more ferocity.
Because your reticular activating system is allowing it to go past the threshold of your conscious mind, your conscious awareness, what's called your liminal system. Subliminal, not aware of it. Liminal, I'm aware of it.
Well, this is where I'm going to use a really odd example now.
Good.
Because I want to just see if this is solely an internal process. I haven't had to look for a parking spot what it feels like years.
Sure.
And that to me is not just internal, I'm just recognizing more lucky events.
Okay.
It's like, oh my God, there is for the 18th time this week, somebody leaving as I'm coming exactly where I need to go.
Yes.
And this goes against all sorts of intuitive frequency analysis that my mind does on a subconscious level, because it's like, there's no way at, the farmer's market on a Sunday that I should be getting this parking spot.
Good. So let's play with that. Let's put the scientific method over here and what we are tempted to do over here. Okay? Scientific method over here, what we're tempted to do here. We're tempted to do over here is, it's the parking fairy. And it's magic, and I'm powerful, I'm psychic. That's okay. Let's go way over here and say, let's start collecting more data. Because we've only got one data point. Your perception that you haven't had to look for a parking space. I'm going to ask you, and I'm going to suggest you may not know the answer to this. How many times have you actually been trying to put your car into a parking space and forgot to do this magical thing?
Well, I can't answer that if I've forgotten.
That's my point. Now, I'm not trying to debunk this. I'm saying we don't have to say either or. The parking fairy may turn out to be a very reasonable thing.
Well, I've stretched this even further because there's something where it's like, yes, I firmly laud the scientific method, but when it comes to shaping my beliefs,
Yes.
I believe in things like the parking fairy.
Sure.
And I've been doing this recently too, but like the travel angels.
Yes.
And those are real things too.
Good.
And I feel like they're real things because there's just such sublime intervention that
Yes.
seems to be occurring.
Yes.
And again, it puts me into this state, and this is the most important thing for me.
Bingo.
Is that it puts me into this state of I am at one with something, I am at peace with something, I need to serve whatever this is.
Our definition of having meaning in your life
Exactly. And it reminds me of that, so much so that before I go to bed, I ask, show me what you want, I will get there soon, and please just remind me of your existence through just delightful and surprising little interactions throughout my day.
Yes.
And all of these little things happen, and that might be reticular activating system, and that might actually be, I don't know, a bigger, older cosmic brother winking and giving me little nudges.
Yes.
And just believing in a little bit of the latter while still maintaining skepticism.
Yes.
And still trying to keep a healthy doubt and an understanding of data and reality testing.
Will you repeat, not verbatim because it's a lot of sentences, but that piece over there, just repeat it so everyone can hear you.
While
Maintaining what?
healthy doubt, skepticism.
Yes.
Not a blind faith.
Yes.
But to the point that you were making earlier, just being very conscientious of the domain at which I'm applying this. And when it comes to things like hardship, I feel like it's really helpful to have some of these larger beliefs because they kind of wrench me out of this suffering that I'm making for myself, because I can go to this belief of, something larger than me is guiding this.
Yeah.
What am I learning?
Yes.
Or another belief that I hold is that to answer one of the unanswerable questions, why are we here? I hold a belief that can never be proven, but I'm here to help.
Good.
And so when something difficult happens, especially with other people or other living things, and I am feeling a negative state, holding that belief of I am here to help, again, crowbars me out of a negative state of mind and puts me into a cooperative and really kind of nice version of myself that I wouldn't otherwise have.
Is that a useful assumption that something is true?
Yes, I believe so.
Is it not useful? Is it harmful in any way?
No. Well, there could be a couple of edge cases. I don't want to be too quick to say no, but
let's say, are there reasonable negative consequences to at least skeptically holding that as a tentative belief? My whole point. Now, if you were one of these people, what I call the really sharp pencil people, the people who can't get a sense of knowing, they can't, unless they have validated this in the world of the physical, what can be looked at, listened to, felt, tasted, touched, measured, and weighed, you would be unable to do that, and you might actually have a worse life. You'd certainly be suffering more than you are now. So we get into the why of belief, and that scale of belief is very important. You're past your convincer, you're not up to total certainty, but we get back to values. Why do you choose to believe that? It effing works.
makes me feel better.
Well, it not only makes you feel better, because believing that you're Michael Jordan might make you feel better. I don't know. Because Michael Jordan's not doing what Michael Jordan was known for. I don't know. Maybe he's miserable right now. I don't know. But my point is, knowing this is giving you a better life. I'm suggesting everybody who encounters you is having a better life because of that belief, that tentative, though skeptically held belief. I don't think there's any way to lose with that. But that's just a belief of mine.
Do you have any other beliefs that you hold that have helped you to feel internal peace throughout your day, your life?
Yes, but that's because peace is so high on my values hierarchy. Number one, whatever is happening is going to pass. Whatever is happening is going to change. That appears to be one of the only constants in our scientific approach of the universe. The one constant seems to be change. It's all going to change. Now, for some people, that's disturbing.
Hard to control.
You can't control it. For other people, that's one of the most liberating thoughts I can have. If I stop trying to resist that, and if I stop trying to hang on to stuff that's just going to change, I stop suffering. It's a challenge in today's world, and it's taken me decades to get to that point where I'm making true progress. But it's all going to change. I am not my body. That has been validated so many times I can't count, to my utter satisfaction. I am not my body. Who I am, my identity, is not my body. I am not my thoughts. I'm not my emotions. I'm not even the state of awareness, the condition of my awareness. When I just strip it all down, and I can't do that without having built this capacity to be still, who I am remains self-evident, utterly silent, breathtaking. That true self gives me profound peace because its nature is peace. Its very nature is peace, which takes me back to, I'm not my body. If I just come back to who I already am, it's peace personified. All I have to do is get that quiet. I've done it 20, 25 times today already. It's getting validated again and again and again and again and again. But it's my world. Somebody else may just, rubbish. Okay. But you asked, what gives me peace? What belief? Those tandem beliefs are remarkable for achieving peace.
You've helped me and a lot of your other clients to change their beliefs about themselves. And I think that you were just mentioning how wonderful the practice of stillness is to help you remember that you are peace underneath all of that. And I think that stillness has been very helpful for me to highlight micro beliefs that I have about me.
Brilliant.
For example, I'm walking up the stairs the other day and I'm thinking to myself, oh, it's past 2 p.m. and I listen to a lot of Huberman, so I shouldn't drink any caffeine, otherwise I'm not going to get as good a night's sleep. That's a belief. And I'm walking upstairs and I'm like, well, I can't get my best work done if I'm not caffeinated. And I'm like, oh, it's another belief. That's a micro belief where it's like, I cannot get my best work done if I am not caffeinated.
Good.
And I was wondering, that's a largely unconsciously held belief.
Yes. Why do you have it?
Because
what is Huberman to you?
He's an authority figure
yes.
He's couched in the scientific method.
Yes.
So there is a shortcut to trust.
In lieu of validation empirically yourself, you're taking the shortcut of believing that. That's a good bet. What I'm saying is, it may not be true. And it's very important how you frame your beliefs. How do you state them? I can only get my best work done if I'm caffeinated. Can I suggest the operative word there is only? I get work done when I'm caffeinated. I get my best work done. But can I not ever do my best work when I'm not caffeinated? We're just applying the scientific method here. It's taking us time, though. It may be causing people's minds to wander. They may be going off now because, well, they're not giving me these sound bites all of a sudden. But I'm saying if you want to work with these beliefs, this is what you need to do. Because you may learn that you can, in fact, do equally good work, not caffeinated, if you use other means.
And I think the first thing I want to do is thank you, because I wouldn't have even noticed that belief if I hadn't stopped the chatter within my mind beforehand.
Sure.
Stilled my mind, gotten very quiet, and then saw what came up, and then evaluated, is this a belief that is serving me?
Good.
Probably not, because I want to do my best work right now.
Yes.
And I think that this has another convenient shout out to our conversation on moderation. Because in order to test that belief, I've got to explore another edge. I've got to change the conditions to validate that belief within myself.
Yeah, you're not the same person that you were prior to that investigation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And throw the mediocrity aside, because it's like, can I actually get to that level of excellence without having caffeine?
Is the universe helping you right now to drink caffeine, but not addictively?
Yes.
That's a good shortcut tentative belief. It's useful. I like it. I will use that myself because I don't want to take 5 hours now and 6 whiteboards just parsing that out empirically according to the scientific method. By the way, to be very clear, empirical is frequently misused. Empirical is not the scientific method. Empirical, empiricus, Latin, experience.
Love it when you do this. Let's go.
From experience. A true, what's called empiric, an empiricist, only works with practical experience. They do not use scientific principles or theories. Theories are beliefs that have been validated to such a degree that people who can't get that sense of knowing without going this far don't believe. A true empiric, an empiricist, doesn't use scientific theories or principles. They base everything on practical experience. Empiricism is one of the tools, one of the pieces of the scientific principle. Really important to draw that distinction. I'm sorry to get all pin-headed about this, but it's important to know.
Very important. Because,
well, some people may think, Jesus, Jim, get back to the point.
well, I'm being unknowingly ignorant, and it could turn somebody off this conversation if it triggers them the wrong way because I'm misusing terminology. And I think that it's incredibly important to shine that light and to really clarify what we mean when we say certain things, and for you to flag if actually, that's not what you're using that language in a way that you might not be intending.
Well, it sounded, I'm not sure you are doing that. I'm just saying it started to sound like empiricism and scientific method were kind of being used almost synonymously. I just wanted to draw the distinction between the two.
No, and I think it's an incredible thing to do because I actually don't know that many people who would have even thought that was a worthy thing to draw and then been able to do so eloquently. So again, I seriously can't thank you enough because you're just clearing up a lot, and it's such a great feeling to now be able to go home and to allow all of this knowledge that you've just shared to start to settle and then to change the way that I see the world.
Oh.
Because I know that that's something that will happen. Even just thinking about this topic, one of my friends was telling me that she'd just gotten married just gotten engaged and could hardly believe it. And she had to she was waking up in the middle of the night, checking the ring was still on. And so it's like all of these, it changes the way that I now see every moment of walking around. So I can't thank you enough for doing such a good job in really answering these tough bloody questions and doing so many so well. My last question for you is there anything that's on your mind, on your heart, that you would want to share with the audience about just belief in general?
That's interesting. I think the more aware we are of what beliefs are, why we have them, the range of beliefs and why we have a range of beliefs, all of us. And to then be aware as much as possible of what it is we believe. It's much deeper and denser than we think. We're trying to keep all this at an unconscious level for ease of use. Remember, we're always trying to conserve energy. But every once in a while, it's good to just take a moment and say, what do I believe and why? Especially in practical terms, and especially with regard to self-beliefs. Am I limiting myself by my beliefs? Because who I am, who I can be, and who I think I am are all radically different things. My job is to see the infinite possibilities in other human beings. That exploration just gives me huge reward and meaning, just intrinsically. I watched as you started moving along a vector right past who you thought you were to something that I saw clear glimpses of years ago. Now, just because I see it doesn't mean somebody else is going to see it. But when they see it and they realize that a great way to change a belief, especially a limiting belief that you have of yourself, is very incremental suggestion, and most importantly, what I call auto-suggestion, what you tell yourself again and again and again, but at an incremental level. You don't say, I can make $1 bazillion and then wonder why you can't. I can make more than I'm making right now. A little more. What I call doable steps. Then those become validated and they change the trajectory of your life. I had a client, a kid who was full ride baseball scholarship, had just gotten cleats, metal cleats. He was at that level of play, but already had full ride scholarship to college. Great baseball player. Going around first base, trying to steal second, caught a cleat, tore his IT band, his iliotibial band, the whole side of his leg just torn up, freaked him out. From that point forward, he believed, dare I say, he knew, certain, he can't slide. He cannot slide. That was called one-time learning. It went directly into his brain stem. His parents brought him, they tried everything. This kid was on his way to losing his scholarship because if you can't slide, you ain't playing college ball, let alone pro. And what we did was we broke the method step by step from getting on base in the first place to having completed stealing second base. It's like 4 or 5 pages of very discrete information. He described it to me, to the point where we got it down. Then in a very deep and receptive state, we took him through the process of going from leading off first base to stealing second, standing up. I just did it. That deep suggestion in his brain caused his motor cortex to relearn how to steal. Now, he's not aware of that, but we must have done that 500 times. He stole second base 500 times. We just didn't do it on the field. Before his next game, I had his mother bring him. I said, don't even get out of the car. Do me a favor, Mom, don't watch. You're not going to like this. I decked him. He goes in deep. We ran through it one more time. I said, Mom, take him, have the coach watch him before the game because it's going to affect where the coach puts him. Coach stands at second base. Kid's at first base. He says, steal second. Kid steals second. Stands up, brushes himself off and goes, I won't tell you what he said because this may be on the Disney Channel. But let's just say he almost had to go change his underwear. Okay? Now, that's incremental changing of what you believe, and it made his life better. But we didn't just say, oh, you can do anything. You can be a professional baseball player. He may or may not be. I don't know. Beliefs are powerful. Understand them, work with them, and they're more powerful, not less powerful.
Well, Jim, the reason that we're having this conversation is because you fundamentally shifted the beliefs of Spencer, who was the guy that put us in touch in the first place.
Oh, that was a joy, by the way, because I couldn't stand to hear the self-limiting belief. It literally made me sick inside because I could see it wasn't true.
And well, what beautiful work that you did, because you helped him to shape his belief from I am a jock to actually I am a real capable student.
And he was.
He was.
He was.
Absolutely was.
That's the joke.
But
yes,
the ability for you to help your clients to recognize and then to shift these beliefs within themselves,
yes,
change the trajectory of their life, and
yes,
ultimately have a better chance of securing fulfillment, meaning,
yes,
and shifting identity,
yes,
all of these things is one of the 1,000 reasons that I want to say thank you for just the life that you have pursued and the where you've chosen to point your mastery, because you have a lot of gifts, you have a hell of a mind, an even bigger heart, and to have ruthlessly put those to helping other people it's changed my life, and I hope from these conversations can help to change others as well.
Oh, bless your heart. Well, honestly, it's my pleasure. I feel bad. I feel selfish because I'm the one that gets all this reward when you guys take off and fly. That's my greatest joy.
It's a belief.
It is. But thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
And thank you for paying attention through this whole thing. I know sometimes it's challenging, but if you believe you can, you just might be able to.
So as always, thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode. Now, if you're looking to build a stillness practice yourself, we have a lot of free resources, audios that Jim's recorded, etc., and you can see those in our show notes below. Along with that, there are also online courses that you can roll in if you want to learn more from Jim. We also have Obsidian mind maps. You can see a couple of them popping up here on the screen. Now, these are really cool ways to look at the podcast information and really just get an overview of all of the podcast topics and deepen the information within yourself. And within them, there are more of Jim's recordings. There's also a lot of Jim's artwork. So if you're interested in any more still life stuff, you can find a bunch of links in the description below. Finally, I really hope that you're getting as much out of this as I have. This is why we started this whole thing in the first place. because the combination of gym and the practice of stillness had really helped to transform our lives here at Still Life. We just wanted to make as much of that available to you. So hopefully you're getting a lot out of it. And please let us know if there's anything that you want to see more of in the future or less of. Anyway, hope you have a lovely day. Bye-bye.